Hi friends, I hope all is well. I had extra time on this day, so I decided to paint a ground layer before collaging. My plan is to have mid to light value blue solid ground, then create a horizontal composition collage on top of it. This turquoise blue was too dark, so I had to mix in some white paint to lighten it up. The papers I pulled for this collage are off to the side. You'll get a better look at them once I start collaging. These two multi-layer painted papers have sections that have turquoise paint straight from the tube. I'm checking to see if I need to add more white paint to lighten it up more. I don't want the two to match. These two papers were made at the same time as the two multi-layer painted papers that I used for Days 5 collage. I'll link a tutorial video on how to make these papers in the description box. Anyway, I need to add more white paint to lighten up the turquoise blue paint. I typically use off-white paint instead of white because I like how it tones down the color. For this collage, I wanted a cleaner looking mid to light turquoise ground layer, so that's why I'm using white paint. One more quick check to see if the color contrast between the paint and one of the papers. It could go even lighter, so I'm adding a light wash of only watered down white paint. I'm showing you this painting process so you have an idea of the steps it took to get the turquoise color right. I know it can be boring to watch somebody mix paint, but I feel it's necessary to show you this process. One more thing, once the paint dries, it'll be a bit lighter, so then it'll be a perfect shade. This collage will have a limited color palette of yellow, turquoise, and pink. Even though the color palette is limited, using papers with multi-layer painted patterns will elevate the design. As I mentioned in previous videos, when I want to have large sections of pattern papers, I use horizontal or vertical or diagonal compositions. These compositions lend themselves to displaying large elements. For the design, I'm keeping it simple because the patterns on the papers are multi-layered. I'll be using long, narrow strips of various lengths and widths. The pattern papers will be wider to showcase the complex designs. Along with using these pattern papers, I will incorporate solid elements as well. The painted ground layer will be viewed as a solid element. Also, I pulled a solid bright yellow paper that you see on the right side of the table. I miscalculated the length of the paper and cut it too short. I wanted it to reach from edge to edge. I'll cut another piece of this paper and use the other paper at another time. You'll see that some elements I glue right away, while others I'm unsure about the placement and I'll glue those later. Sometimes I need to see how the element will look next to other ones before gluing it down. This solid bright yellow paper will be used sparingly as well as the bright yellow pattern paper that I've already glued into place. I don't want these papers to distract the viewer's eyes away from the main elements, but to see them as accent elements. The design is starting to develop with elements in different widths and lengths. I think it adds a good design detail to have some elements cut short so they don't reach the edge of the paper. I will continue to add shorter and longer length elements. The marks on this paper were made by wiping off the paint from my brayer while monoprinting. I love the texture and unevenness of these marks. They are seen as patterns. Also, the pink papers will be used sparingly as accent elements like the bright yellow papers. The collage needed another dark element using one of the multi-layer painted papers. The first element using these papers is mid-tone value. The other paper options are mid to light value. I decided to place it at the top of the page for a couple reasons. First, it fits perfectly in that area. Secondly, I was thinking that a larger piece of paper would look better in the lower area. This smaller bright yellow element will add contrast against the dark value element. At this point, I'll add music as you watch me finish this collage. I'll come back for the review. I decided to switch out the pink element on the lower left because the collage needed a longer element in that area to balance the design. The smaller pink element didn't have enough weight to it. The middle to top section of the collage had darker elements, so there was more weight in that area. The lower section as a whole is mostly mid to light value, so I needed the pink element to be longer to add more weight to balance that section. Here's the grayscale version. Let's go on to day 17. I'm continuing to work in the spineless sketchbook and back to using a muted color palette. My plan is to create a collage using the cruciform composition, but it won't be too obvious. This light terracotta stamp pattern paper was used for day 9 as well. I really like the pattern, so I wanted to use it again. Also, I used a similar transparent pattern paper for day 3. This paper was made out of painting uneven lines using matte acrylic paint on deli paper. I almost forgot to put a piece of paper behind the page I was working on. I'll be using Golden's Gloss Medium, which is a liquid, to glue the elements. This sketchbook has perforated pages, so the gloss medium may seep through to the page behind it. I decided it was not necessary to also have the washi tape on top of the perforation. I like using either gloss or matte medium to glue transparent papers because it keeps the transparency. During this month's daily practice, I've been going back and forth between using gloss and matte medium. I typically like using matte when creating in a sketchbook because it helps the pages from sticking together. I'm using gloss because I'm trying to use up the remaining medium in the jar. I'm waiting to glue the stamped terracotta paper because I'll be gluing more elements slightly underneath it. Along with pattern papers, I'll be using a few solid papers as well. Besides giving the viewer's eyes a place to rest, it's a good design idea to have a combination of solid and pattern papers. I like the worn texture on this monoprinted paper. It adds a grungy element to the design. I don't remember if it was the first or second pull. This paper was created by applying a layer of absorbent ground first, let it dry, then apply acrylic paint on top. It's another type of painted paper that has texture. I'll include the tutorial video on how to make these papers in the description box. Around this time, I was thinking about if I should leave some of the white paper showing. If you've watched any of my other videos before, I talk about how it's hard for me to do this. It's my gut feeling to cover the whole surface with color. Leaving some of the white paper showing is the same as including solid color elements. It gives the viewer's eyes a place to rest. It's also an easy way to include a light element. At this point, I'll add music as you watch me finish this collage. I'll come back for the review. The collage is balanced and cohesive. It has very small and large elements. This is another color combination that I'd like to use again. Do you easily see the cruciform shape? It may not be that obvious, so I'm adding red lines to show the shape. Here's the grayscale version that shows the strong contrast. Let's continue to day 18. I'm working in the smaller Strathmore sketchbook that's 8.5 by 5.5 inches. I pulled leftover scraps mostly from the collage that I made back in September using multi-layer painted papers. I'll link that video in the description box as well. I didn't put a piece of paper behind the paper I was working on because I'm using a glue stick on this day. This was a quickly made collage due to time constraints. Before I sped up the video, this collage took under 18 minutes to make, which is fast considering that I didn't have a plan going into it. You'll see me use most of the scraps as is or with minimal alterations, all the while reminding myself to include elements in all three values, varying the sizes and shapes, and leaving some of the white paper showing. I switched out the orange thin element for a dark blue one because this area needed a dark value. The elements above and below were mid to light value, so a dark value was needed to add contrast to this area. I wasn't sure if I wanted those two elements. Since time was limited, I thought it'd be best to remove them both and continue on. This dark value element worked better in this area because it was above a mid to light element. I'm constantly thinking about having contrasting color elements. The solid brown element could have worked in this area as well, but I wanted to use as many of the pattern scraps as possible first. I will use it instead as a narrow dark element in the top portion of the collage, which you'll see soon. This collage needed more solid color elements besides the brown and blue narrow ones, so I pulled this solid muted orange painted paper. I'm using it to break up some of the white area in the lower right and fill in an awkward area in the upper left. Creating this collage was like putting together building blocks. It's an interesting design, definitely different than any other collage I've made, but I do like it. Here's the grayscale version. Let's go on to day 19. This is another art session where I'm working within a limited time and not having a design plan going into it. This collage took me around 19 minutes to make. I'm using more of the painted uneven line deli paper from previous collages and leftover scraps. This will be another muted color palette collage. I'm using Golden's Gloss Medium to glue the deli papers to the page. I forgot to put a piece of paper behind the page I was working on, but fortunately I didn't get too much of the gloss medium on that page. I like the unevenness of the black stripes and the texture of this painted paper. I made a note to create another one for my paper stash. I typically don't put two black horizontal stripe papers next to each other, but I'm considering the horizontal stripe papers as a ground layer. As I continue to build this collage, you'll see that other papers will be placed on or around them. Having black stripes in a horizontal orientation helped to create the design for this collage. The other papers will be in a vertical orientation to contrast with the horizontal stripes. A dark value element was needed since up to this point the elements were light value on this layer. I didn't want to add too many dark value elements since the horizontal stripes were black and there was a lot of it showing. Adding thin dark elements besides and on top of light value elements add contrast to this area. I didn't want the various light elements to be seen as one large light value element. For not having a plan going into this art session, this collage turned out balanced and cohesive. Besides the value contrast, it has composition contrast, horizontal and vertical. Here's the grayscale version. Let's go on to the final collage session for this video. I'm continuing to use transparent papers, a limited muted color palette, and Golden's gloss medium. Also, I'm still working in the Strathmore sketchbook. And once again, I forgot to put a piece of paper behind the page I'm working on. This is a security envelope scrap. As I mentioned in my last video, these types of ephemera are getting harder to come by since correspondence is mostly electronic. I still have a good amount in my paper stash, so I'm not concerned about running out anytime soon. My plan for this collage is to keep it simple with geometric shape elements. It's an easy design style for me to work in. As always, I'm being mindful of value contrast and elements in various sizes and shapes. This Dots transparent paper was monoprinted, but I applied a layer of acrylic medium first to the tissue paper. As I mentioned in previous videos, I no longer do this step. It was suggested to me that it make the paint apply better to the surface. I found it wasn't necessary. Also, the paper was more transparent without applying the acrylic medium first. You'll see what I mean once I glue it to the page with gloss medium. Since I'm working in a sketchbook and not in a collage that will hang on the wall or I'll sell, I wanted to include some of these tissue papers to use them up. The light lavender and the Celadon papers were hand painted at the same time as the off-white with black stripe papers that were used in yesterday's collage. I love the unevenness and texture of loosely hand painted papers. This burgundy swirl paper was monoprinted. I'll link monoprinting videos in the description box if you're interested in learning that printing technique. At this point, I'll add music as you watch me finish this collage. I'll come back for the review. I'm happy with the way this collage turned out. I can see using it as a reference for a larger collage. Here's the grayscale version so you can see the value contrast. It's mostly dark value with a balanced amount of mid and light values. The next video in this series will include days 21 through 25. We're getting near the end of this series, only 2 videos to go. I appreciate you hanging around for this long video series. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Take care.